Hello, I'm David Saphirstein, instructor at Full Sail University. I also consult with teams and organizations helping with fan experience and fan engagement, mostly on the traditional sports side, but also in esports. I'm really excited about the conversation we're about to have, focused on the Mountain West Conference and Boise State, one of their member universities. Both of them are leaders in the collegiate esports space, as well as in hosting events alongside some traditional sports. So really excited to introduce our I'll say guests, special guests for the time for the panel. Joining me is Carolayne Henry, who is the Senior Associate Commissioner for the Mountain West Conference, overseeing their NCAA rules, compliances, and other legal areas. She also oversees the esports efforts and initiatives, and I know she's excited to talk about esports. Thanks for joining us, Carolayne.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me, and glad that we can put a spotlight on esports, not just for the Mountain West, but for collegiate sports generally.
Awesome, great. And also with us is Doc Haskell, who is the head coach of esports for Boise State University, and has really pioneered and grown that program into one of the best in the country. And last year, he was named College Esports Coach of the Year. Welcome and congratulations, Doc.
Thank you. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Glad to be here.
Love that. Love that reference to old sports radio. So let's lay a little groundwork, let people know really how you ended up in esports. Carolayne, why don't you tell us how? I mean, obviously you had a full plate to begin with. Looks like a full-time job already. Where did esports come from?
You know, really, it was the brainchild of our Mountain West Board of Directors, which are our presidents from each one of our schools. And at a meeting, it's been about 4 years ago now, it was brought to their attention by another president. He said, how about Mountain West trying esports? And this was, I believe it was December 2017. And he looks to our staff, me in particular, and says, hey, can you conduct an event in 3 months? I'm like, absolutely. And then I'm thinking, I need to really find out what it is. So over the course of those 3 months, 4 months, I ended up getting in touch with Doc Haskell and a couple other folks from our member institutions. And we staged our first Mountain West Conference esports event with 2 teams, Boise State and UNLV. And that really was the start of it. And the next year it grew to, I believe, 10 teams. And now all 12 of our teams participate in some form or fashion.
So at that point, how much did you know about esports?
Nothing. I researched, and UNLV has an institute, the International Gaming Institute, and a guy by the name of Robert Rippey. I invited him to one of our board meetings so that he could explain it, and I picked his brain about esports and who I should talk to. And the next person told me the next person I should talk to. And then I did a lot of research to just get some background. And honestly, and Doc, I think I just called you cold. I called a lot of people cold and said, here's what I'm trying to do. What are some of the things that I'm missing?
All right, quick question though. Did you start playing these video games at that time?
Well, I played old school video games way back when you used to go to the arcade. And so, yeah. And so I was a Miss Pac-Man champion. But anyway, awesome. I already had an Xbox at my house. And so I dabbled with it, whether it's with my nephews or, you know, I would always play something. But when I started doing this, I actually got a computing station, put it downstairs in my basement, and started to get into the game so that I could explain to our board, here's what the games are, and here's what's in the game, so that they could feel more comfortable about what their students were playing.
Right. Cool. What about you,
We're all
Doc?
impressed with your research. Yeah, it's important to do that research and make sure that you're well versed in it.
I'm not playing games, I'm researching. Right.
Exactly. I have to research every day.
Yes.
My wife still doesn't buy that line. I'm a clinical assistant professor at Boise State in the College of Education and College of Innovation and Design. And I had been doing a lot of work in game spaces for a long time, you know, Minecraft as a classroom and some of those types of things. This became a natural kind of extension of my just curiosity as it was starting to really develop in 2016, 2017. And I decided I was just going to do a keynote, or an article, or just add some curriculum to what I was doing. And I very quickly discovered that collegiate esports specifically was about to explode. There were only 15 to 20 universities at that time. And I saw kind of a gold rush opportunity for the university. So I brought the idea forward. I failed to recommend a good person to helm this new vessel at the university. And I ended up with the captain's hat on unintentionally. I love it, but it is at least 3 times more work than I used to do. What
was the feedback or the response when you really started to go to the administration and push for a bigger esports program?
Well, part of it was really helping them understand what it was. We discovered quickly that that messaging was primarily emotional and needed to, especially for us, you know, a Division I, you know, football school, that that we needed to make sure that they understood it by referencing other sports that they knew: basketball, football, volleyball. And so using that visual vocabulary, using that vocabulary to describe the student athletes was key in helping them get it, if you will, right? Because otherwise it doesn't make a lot of sense. One of my favorite asides is, you know, mom walks into a child's room and says, "How could you watch people play video games? That is the craziest thing." Leaves room, goes into living room, watches Food Network. Right? We're consumers of things that we're amazed by, and esports very quickly fits that bill once you see it. So really, it was showing them. We had for us an early kind of show match introduction night. We, you know, took our student union, biggest ballroom, built a stage, big monitors, brought in casters, and then anybody who didn't at that point get what it was about, you know, 2 teams trying to overcome the obstacles to defeat one another, that storytelling, they understood as soon as they walked in and saw the lights and the spectacle and things like that. And we've been off and running ever since.
Sure. Where do you both think collegiate esports is right now? You know, you said it was, Doc, you said it was ready to explode, obviously, a few years ago. Has it exploded? Is it there? Where is it right now?
I think it is. I think it is the equivalent of 1910 in relation to football, right? 1869 when collegiate football spins up with Rutgers, Yale, and you know, and Full Sail were the 3 first universities to get going. I'm kidding. Princeton, right, were the first 3 to really start it. It was a student game before that, just like esports, and those 3 universities decided to honor the students and their wish to play against one another, and it grew over time. But it took about 50 years for that to take off across all colleges. I think we're at that quickening stage for colleges. When we started, Carolayne, what were there? You know, 20 some. I think Boise State was the 23rd or 24th university to declare an official program. And there are over 200 recognized today, over 300 total that are either there or about to announce. And 3 years ago, there were 2 universities in the Mountain West, and today there are 12 that are competing at some level. And many more are moving to formalized. I mean, we have these meetings with the Mountain West, and Carolayne can talk about that, but it's not just student representatives, it's faculty and administration representatives who are looking for ways to support their students in this effort. Even if they don't fully understand it, they get that it's important and that it's a part of their culture.
Right, yeah. Absolutely. Carolayne, what about on the conference level? Where do you think we are?
The conference level is a little bit different than the institutional level. I think it's taken off more from the institutional level than the conference level, and it takes more buy-in from your conferences in order to get it moving from the conference level. You know, right now we have the Mountain West, and the Big East, Division II, you know, a couple of Division II conferences and others, and there are other conference partners, but it's a matter of communicating to your board of directors, your presidents, the importance of esports for not just the competition aspect, but what it brings to our students academically and the opportunities that it brings to our schools in terms of, you know, enrollment. And Dot can talk to that, but the minute a school says that they're going to sponsor esports, there's a lot of interest, not just from the US, but especially from abroad. So I think we have a little ways to go. And maybe later on, we'll talk about maybe some comparisons with the NCAA, because I think esports is slightly different, obviously, than a conventional sport and how it's looked at. But I do think it's, the pandemic allowed us to do some things with esports that we probably wouldn't have been able to do. We did a social distancing series in April. And one of the things it did, obviously provide competition, but it also allowed student athletes to remain connected to their institutions. And that connection was extremely important at a time when everybody was isolated. So, we've had some good things come up. I think we still haven't gotten up over the hump from a conference perspective, though.
Sure. Doc, Carolayne brought it up. What was the response? Did you see all of a sudden more students applying, wanting to get involved? Did it elevate Boise State?
Well, I mean, it definitely has become one of the things that we're known for now, and admissions reports a marked increase in the number of students who ask about it in different situations. We, over the last year, have had to do several trainings with our admissions department to help them understand what's going on. We bring them down to the arena and we show them what we do so that they can be more knowledgeable, because the questions are coming up. I mean, the fact that they requested that training is evidence to us that they're seeing an uptick in it, although they don't report an association with specific programs as the reason someone comes. But right now, I mean, just for our varsity esports team, which recruits top 5% or top 500 of any of the games that we play as varsity games, we have over 100 individuals that we're tracking for potential recruitment. And that goes back, certainly class of 21, but had a conversation with a young woman from Philadelphia the other day and her parents about coming here. She's class of 2024, and they're already looking at Boise State. So we know it has a big uptick in enrollment, and we know anecdotally, and I think this is more important, it has a big, especially with the pandemic, it has a big impact on our students wanting to remain eligible and remain active in school when a lot of the rest of their life, is pulling them away from continuing in school. But they want to play, they want to broadcast, they want to be part of what we do, they want to be full time, so they're eligible to play. And because of it, there's university is stickier to them right now.
You used the word twice, eligibility, which we often hear in traditional sports, which I find interesting that you even say that. And part of the discussion seems to be, where does esports even fit on the university? Is it academic? Is it athletics? Can you both touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, from our conference perspective, we don't require it to be in any particular area, as long as we have what we call a non-student administrative oversight. As Chris referred to earlier, you have administrators, folks from the administration organizing it. Some athletics departments, not in the Mountain West, but other places, will have esports. Haven't gotten there yet, but it's still within the conference. And so to me, it doesn't matter whether it's in the athletics department, whether it's in the School of Innovation and Design, as long as it provides an opportunity for our students to participate.
And largely
go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say, largely it fits where there is leadership who can put forward time and in some cases space. So we see in a lot of universities, it pops up in student life or recreation, because they have individuals willing to put forward a little time, and they've got some space where they can start it up. And the one truth about all universities is that great projects only exist if there's space to put them. It's very difficult to launch anything that you don't have a space for or can't repurpose a space for. So space being one of the big, I guess, catalysts for starting these up. But we have even had conversations with our athletics over the last couple of years. We're very interested in, well, what would this look like? at our university, we talk about eligibility. We follow the NCAA guidelines that our softball and our football and basketball teams all follow, even though we're not mandated to do so, because we want our students to feel and be seen as student athletes, and that is a good structure for them. 20 hours a week, 24 weeks of contact, minimum grade and advancement requirements.
Carolayne, do you think conferences may somewhat stay away or be concerned because of NCAA regulations that are out there and govern traditional sports?
Since esports is not a part of the NCAA, I don't think that should be a rationale for staying away. I think there are some things that we can learn from the NCAA as it relates to some of the things like eligibility and playing seasons, but there are also some things with esports that maybe are different than the NCAA. I think one of the main things is convincing athletic administrators that this is a sport. And while it's not traditional in their eyes, there's competition, there are training sessions, there's coaching, there are injuries. All of those things happen in esports. It's just not what some people can wrap their heads around. And so my thought is just, how can we show them and convince others that esports has a good place within traditional athletics?
It's not any stranger than rowing.
Well, I was going to say, we have emerging sports, and at one point institutions were like, I don't know if I want to add archery or whatever. Esports could be the same way.
Doc, talk about your program. Give us some numbers, how it's grown, what an event looks like, as far as, again, we know the numbers of people that go to Boise State football games. Yeah. What's the buzz in terms of esports?
In the fall semester, the full COVID semester, we had about 2.1 million unique households tune into our broadcasts on Twitch. Over 10 million minutes watched. That would fill Bronco Stadium and Extra Mile Arena somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 times, right? We know that people care about esports and what's happening. They care when we play Colorado State, or we play Hawaii, we play Nevada, some of our great rivals in conference, and those events have an uptick. We have an arena here that we broadcast from our players on that stage, and when we're not under COVID restrictions, we fill this with 40, 50 folks. For us specifically, because broadcasting is such a big part of what we do, we have essentially a full television broadcast control center so that we can tell the story. But for us, the number of people who follow Boise State esports as an extension of their love of Boise State is a large number, but also we've discovered that there are a ton of new fans in lots of other places. So we have about 30 varsity student athletes and an additional 30 JV, club level players associated with our program. And we'll end up giving more than 100,000 in scholarship this year to members of that group. 6 of our scholarship recipients are female. Many are from, unique or complex situations that college would not be something that they would do if it were not for their extension into esports. And we find that we're recruiting, the top players in the country, and they're deciding between going pro and going to Boise State, which is it's a really exciting conversation to have with a 17-year-old and their family.
So are there restrictions if they, like you said, you follow a lot of the NCAA guidelines? So if you have a student athlete, you treat them the same way. They can't be pro at the same time.
We honestly, we use the NCAA guidelines that our other sports follow as the point of conversation, right? So if we have a rule that says you can't compete professionally and play on your college team and go to school full time, it's not because of competitive reasons. It's because that student needs really get some more organization in their life. It's a conversation point. It's like, okay, so what are they offering you to be able to play over here? Well, let's talk about what you want to be able to accomplish. Is that a good team? Is that an opportunity to do something else? We have a young man by the name of Peyton Wilkin, who is one of our varsity players. And we counseled during the summer, he and I, because his YouTube career was really starting to take off and he was struggling. Should I keep playing and going to school, or should I take this opportunity? And he reached out to, on suggestion, a number of other folks who've done this, and he and his family, with our suggestions as well, decided, no, he's going to take a year off. He's going to really develop his YouTube, career. He can make a lot of money per month doing that and really enjoys it. It's a good opportunity to take off. But the danger is that those students without this level of, I guess, kind of mentorship and leadership might try to do both things and do neither well, right? These are really just opportunities. These rules are opportunities for us to have conversations about what's most important, what's your end game, what do you really get out of either of these situations? Do you need to take a break here so you can do well here, or vice versa?
Right, really using it as a teaching opportunity, not just
if I could jump in a little bit, David, on a couple of the issues that Doc went over.
Sure.
One, in Boise State has great facilities, and appreciate you walking around so our viewers could see that. The second part of that is, for those who don't have those facilities, don't be scared off by that. We have institutions that have been very creative, and I'll use the Air Force Academy as an example. They don't have an eSport arena at all. They practice where they can on campus, but there's an eSport arena here in town which they can go to, and they play our competitions. And what that does is it draws fans from the community in and makes them aware of esports and what we're doing at Air Force. So don't be taken aback by the great facilities that Boise State has, because it is something that you can do, and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Eventually, like Boise State did, you build up to the point where you have your eSport arena and you have your program, and it takes a little work to do that. The second point is, David, on your question as it relates to eligibility rules and amateurism, if I may. From a Mountain West perspective, we do have eligibility rules to participate in our events, and we administer those. But more importantly, one of the issues and the hot topics today in traditional sports is name, image, and likeness, and use of your name, image, and likeness. And the big discussion, I think, moving forward with esports is, how does that work when there are intellectual property rights involved? And how much can you use your name, image, and likeness in conjunction with whatever game that you play? I think that's gonna be a big discussion as it relates to like a YouTube type scenario where students and student athletes are becoming self-influencers, and they're becoming very good at that on a YouTube or whatever their platform is. And so if they're doing that and they happen to say, for example, the back of my chair said something like a game logo, how does that play into what they're doing on their social media channels? So those are some up and coming issues I think we'll need to address. And it's almost on a parallel track with what the NCAA is doing with name, image, and likeness.
Sure, absolutely. Because, Doc, you touched on it, but, a lot of these students have such opportunities out there, whether it's to go pro or YouTube or Twitch or whatever it is, so many opportunities, yet, you want them to come and get an education and the other things that go along with that experience.
Yeah, and I think that part of choosing a university as well, and this is part of the recruiting pitch. So if I drop into a Southern accent, like I'm sitting in your living room recruiting you to come play for us, David, which I think you'd be an amazing Bronco. The conversation that we have is what is the what's next? We know what a college degree can do for your opportunities and open doors, but we seldom talk about what additional guidance and support you receive, and what what communities you'll be introduced to. I think of Madison, who's a student of ours and has had the opportunity to work with Carolayne and to talk about a number of different things because of the relationship that we're able to help her advance, right? Because Boise State's part of the Mountain West, she's had an opportunity to work and chat with Carolayne, especially at our events in Las Vegas, and now has a broader professional community that she can lean on through this process. That's not as easy to draw when we just talk about name and likeness usage rights. But I think it's an important characteristic of what makes college esports valuable, if that makes sense, right, is the relationships. And many of us choose programs because of who we get to interact with and what network they unlock for us. That is a big part of what we do. If someone comes to Full Sail, it should be also largely because of who they get to work with, not just the name on the institution or the color of the turf. And just to be clear, the turf on our stage is blue also. I think it's a state law.
I was going to ask you about that, actually.
It's blue turf on the stage.
Hey, back on the conference level, you mentioned, Carolayne, you mentioned some eligibility requirements. Are there other requirements for the schools as far as programs and what they offer?
No, we don't. And one of the things when we first started is that we want to make it as easy as possible to integrate our programs. And so as time goes on, maybe we'll have some requirements, but what we were trying to do was to get as many Mountain West institutions to participate as possible. And some of them, when they first contacted me, and then I referred them sometimes to Doc, they were starting from scratch. And anything that we could do to help them get up and running. I think it helps to see programs like Boise State and UNLV serve as inspiration. I mean, I watched the Air Force Academy and Colorado State go from like not having really a program to being competing, Nevada, San Jose State, but it was just a matter of let's see what you have and let's collaborate to get everybody up to a certain level.
Yeah, we'll play Colorado State tonight in League of Legends as part of our fall tournament, and they're scary. Mm-hmm. They are legitimately scary. They're going to be the toughest game we play all year, I think.
How important do you both think having an academic program or study in esports is to having a successful team?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's important, but as long as we have the organization and structure, regardless of whether or not it's tied to a particular academic program, and as long as the goal remains graduating our students and, again, providing them an opportunity in a campus community, I think we're fine whether it has an academic program to which it's attached or not. The emphasis still needs to be graduation and, having students go on to be good and productive citizens, regardless of where it is.
Right. Doc, thoughts on that?
Yeah, in football, basketball, volleyball, there are very few programs nationwide that offer a degree in volleyball, right? It's an ancillary program, an important but ancillary program to a field of study otherwise. And I think that it actually adds value not being the primary. I know there are a lot of universities that are interested in esports degrees, and they may already be geared well for that. I'm not sure that all state and land grant institutions who have a specific requirement for their state board of education to fulfill a certain number of nurses and teachers, right? I don't know that it fits well into every one of those state college types of models. I know it does a little bit more into the private and for-profit education sectors. But for us, we want students to pursue something that is engaging to them. We're going to give them all of the experiences necessary on a professional ladder for them to be successful, just like in football, right? You're a great player on your football team, and then you come on as a graduate assistant in kinesiology or business or whatever, right? Geology, and you serve and help, assist and coach that team as a graduate assistant. And then you get a job offer over at this school and then another, there's a professional ladder in esports in the same way that is opened to individuals who spend a lot of time building their respective teams and organizations. I don't think it necessary for us anyway. It doesn't require a degree to get that experience. It's done through action in the program. Our broadcasters, our analysts, folks who are engaged in what we do, get a ton of experience. Paul Vaughn, one of the first graduates of our program with I believe a business degree, is the head coach of Oklahoma City University. And we've got a number of other graduates who are up for the positions that are open right now. And I think that we'll see our students who want a career in esports get those opportunities because of what they did here, not necessarily because of the degree that they have in esports. They have them in other things, electrical engineering and, kinesiology, music. Those are actual degrees that our graduates have that are applying for these different positions, and they'll probably get.
So through the program, you're teaching all the different aspects of esports, whether it's coaching, promotion, the broadcasting piece.
Well, I mean, we engage them where they are. We give them opportunities if that's what they're interested in. If you're in our program, and David, I think you'd be fantastic in our program, you'd pursue the things that interested you. And if that was broadcast production, you'd get all the time you could ever want in broadcast production, and use that to build out whatever additional opportunities you wanted.
Awesome.
But we wouldn't force you to coach.
Okay. So, because I'm more on the broadcast side, I think I'd do better.
Yeah.
Carolayne, you had mentioned that you have people call Doc, or you've had people call Doc for advice. So, but you've been at this a few years now, so I think you're ready to give some of your own advice. What is that advice you give as people call, or if people call from the conference level and at the university level?
So first of all, and I've had some conferences call me, and the first advice I give them is gauge interest from your institutions, but you really have to have support from up top. So if your board of directors are on board, what's the interest? Do you already have programs? Because chances are you already have programs on your campuses that you may not even know about. And then the biggest piece of advice I give folks is you really need to have an administrator, a non-student administrator. You can have a student captain, but you really need to have an institutional administrator overseeing that program. And the reason for that organization is that, one, you can assist with diversity and inclusion in the development of your teams. For Mountain West, the first year we did it, I wouldn't let any teams travel without an adult non-student administrator, because you're bringing a group of students, but then it helps to really organize and structure your team. Once we had the non-student administrator, as it relates to some of the nuts and bolts of, for example, creating what your esports space looks like, I can refer them to Doc and say, okay, maybe you take a visit to Boise State, and Doc can tell you how we started and how we get support for it on campus and where the spaces are. But from a conference perspective, it's very easy to get together our administrators on a conference call and say, here's what our League of Legends season is going to look like. Here's where we are with Overwatch. Here's where we are with whatever game, it is. That just made the organization at the conference level that much easier.
Talk about, looking back, your first event was in 2018 and it's grown. And what I saw last year was what you were setting up at UNLV. You're at the Thomas and Mack Center, and you've got the basketball championship going on in the same building. And then in this large space, you walk in there, you forget you're even at a basketball arena. I mean, it's all esports, from the furniture, the lighting, just the whole vibe that's going on. You forget the basketball is right there. I mean, what was that like, even selling that to people, saying, yeah, there's a basketball tournament going on at the same time as the esports championship?
Sure. It was very deliberate on our part, because what we wanted to do was to integrate esports within our basketball atmospheres to educate folks on esports and the opportunities there. At the same time, we also wanted folks from esports to see, your conventional, your traditional sports aren't that much different than the competition you're going to watch in this room. In terms of the setup itself, what we wanted to do is to make it feel like a championship environment. You have a basketball championship environment out here, you have an esports championship environment inside, and there is more commonality between the two than not, but we just really wanted to emphasize the possibilities with esports. So, we worked with eStars to get it set up, but that was very deliberate in how we set that room up and how we wanted folks to come in from basketball to see it. An example, I saw a couple grandparents come in, and they didn't know what esports were, and they sat and they watched League of Legends. They probably didn't know what they were watching, but then they walked around the room and they said, my grandson plays that game. And then they became interested. And how do I get my grandson one of those kind of game chairs? And all of a sudden you have people who are now interested because someone in their family does something with esports.
Right. I mean, you both mentioned, Doc, you mentioned it early on. It's just getting it out there, having these events and letting people stumble upon it in some cases and be like, and get hooked.
Yeah.
Well, Carolayne famously, or at least famous to me, went to an event in Phoenix or Tempe. Yeah, and it was the TESPA Fiesta Bowl Overwatch event, and we had talked before you went, and then when you came back, eyes massive. Got it, right? It's like, yeah. I understand this. I understand what the spectacle is. I understand. I may not understand all the details of the game, but that doesn't matter. Football is incredibly complex, and the majority of viewers don't really understand. They don't know what a 3 technique is. They can't tell the difference between a slant and a wheel route, right? That doesn't matter. It's 2 teams. And once you establish that kind of vocabulary, what do we need to do to beat the Rams tonight? We have a history with the Rams. They beat us and eliminated us from the playoffs last year, the most painful loss for our program ever. There's bad blood. I mean, we love them, but there's bad blood. Immediately, we understand the vocabulary of rivalry. The game and the field look different, sure, but it's the same vocabulary.
Right. And you had even said it's the storytelling.
It's 100%.
Creating that rivalry and letting people know there is that rivalry and that thirst, if you will.
And when, Carolayne and I have the opportunity to settle our bad blood at Miss Pac-Man, it's going to be big. It's going to be a big event. It's going to be a big event.
I'd like the rights to that event. So we'll talk after.
Left-handed or right-handed, you take your pick.
Wow.
Oh, that now she's just flexing.
Yeah, just laid it down there. Doc, what advice do you give when a program calls and says, yeah, we've seen this esports thing. We think it would be good for the university. That's all we know.
It depends on who's calling. If it's an administrator, just start. Put dates on the calendar, put things on the calendar, make them happen. Because you won't learn what you need to learn until you start, until you make a couple of mistakes, right? And everybody's going to make them, and you can't avoid them. I think that's a big important part. So just find out what your students are playing, come up with an event, even if it's just an internal tournament. It doesn't have to be the end all be all. If it is somebody who is struggling to get people to buy in, maybe a faculty member that may not have a lot of sway as far as space and budgets. It's similar, but let people see it. No one ever remembers. I mean, we can create slideshows all day about all the, the benefits and, the money and all these other schools doing amazing things. But the only message that's really sticky is an emotional message, right? And that's different on every campus. At University of Utah, it was about honoring the student experience that was already happening. For us here, kind of blue turf thinking, it was, hey, we're a disrespected mid-major, but in the same week we beat BYU and Notre Dame, and for them that was massive, right? They got that. Our famous video welcoming University of Oklahoma to and challenging them to play us in esports included, the Fiesta Bowl, Statue of Liberty, Ian Johnson proposal clip, in that, definitely poking, the big bear of University of Oklahoma, and Mike Aguilar, who's a colleague and a friend, is their director. And I told him, incoming, here it comes, buddy, because that really is the core of what it takes. My advice, message big, and use all of the language and vocabulary that is important in your university. Don't do what Boise State does, or you name the school, because it's different everywhere else. Use the vocabulary of your campus to tell your story. And honestly, tie it with as many things as you can. Nothing was more popular than that video, which referenced a big part of our football competitive culture.
Sure, absolutely. Connect it with something people can already relate to.
Yep.
So we're about out of time, but as we wrap, where do you hope to see collegiate esports, and where do you think, what's the new frontier? It's a two-part question.
That's a really good one. I'd like to see more programs, more conferences engage in esports. Because there's not really an overarching governance structure, it's still somewhat fragmented. You have groups of conferences or institutions over here or over there who are playing esports. I would like to see some sort of overarching structure, and it doesn't have to involve any of the property rights of the developers, but something where there's consistency with maybe eligibility, recruiting. Recruiting has become a pretty big thing. And if you didn't know it was esports, you would think the complaints about recruiting and tampering were any other traditional sport. That's how it's come. Scholarships. And then any type of programming, as Chris had mentioned, that might be interesting to our students, that could help them go on and decide what they want to do post-college. Those are some things, but mainly some organization, so that we can see more eSport conferences and institutions participating.
Awesome. Doc, what about you?
What would I predict, or what would I like to see? Which direction you want me to go there?
Both.
Let's see. I still think that the story of esports is the Spider-Man story a little bit. It's the local story. I mean, our local group. There is no part of our season that is more important than the Mountain West events that we do, because that's our neighborhood, right? Those are the kids on our block, and we need to do well for them. I think that eventually, and when I say eventually, I mean 10, 15 years eventually, there'll be a solid overarching structure, but waiting for that doesn't benefit us per se. The most important thing, and the thing I hope we're able to continue to do, is to play in a conference that has history and that has meaning. Because that's what moves the needle for us. Boise State was put on a top 10 list yesterday for Overwatch, which is awesome. National universities, but our fans, while they know who Maryville and Harrisburg are at the top of that top 10 list, they don't have nearly as much weight as when we play Fresno State, which is a stinking good team. And it takes everything we have to just, compete with them and hopefully beat them. But those kind of local stories, I think, are really important. And so I hope that those become a much bigger part of what happens, not just for us, but, all over. If UT Dallas and North Texas, have a great rivalry, I think that's really good for collegiate esports. Sure. It's not as important. We can't all fit on the top 10 all the time, right? It's an honor to be listed, but really it's what happens locally. Or a team that struggles, that loses their first 3 games, but then defeats one of the top programs in the conference. That's an amazing story. I think I hope to see more conferences, and we see the NECC, we see the ECAC, we see a lot of these conferences, Big 12 spinning up. Even the Pac-12 it's not fully sanctioned yet by their conference, but they're doing quite a bit. Those types of regional rivalries, I'd like to see those more advanced, and for us to develop in time some kind of, we kind of already have it, but a kind of a bowl game type system where you can get invited as a program to play multiple games against another university.
Sure. It's all about exposure.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, hey, this was great. Carolayne Henry from Mountain West Conference, Doc Haskell from Boise State University, and College Esports Coach of the Year. This was just a great conversation I've been wanting to have for a while. I appreciate your time and the insight you've given.
Thank you.
Thank you.